Buber often says dialogue can be in silence. It's the way you respond to the other, and that response is felt by the other. I noticed on the cover of your book, you have a picture of a mother kissing a child. Those kisses are so crucial. Not just the kiss, but the message, so to speak, the visceral message, the felt message that the child is confirmed, as Buber says. And the bond of love is not just a question of feelings. Of course, the feelings do change, but it's that sense that we are together, bonded, a deep sense of mutual trust. And I suspect that's what the family therapy is concerned with.
You know, in the world of therapy in the 21st century, where everything is manualized, it's, you know, based on pathologies and a certain number of sessions. It's, you know, the it world. Everything has become more and more of the it world, and the doctors become kind of like the it world. You know, the family therapist is supposed to know how to solve a problem instead of using the problem to have people meet each other. But sometimes what I find is that when people talk to each other, and I feel that something's being, this is where I use this word co-creation, you know, the word from brain science now, that people are co-creating each other. When I feel there's a moment of co-creation, I'll sometimes ask people afterwards, I said, did you say something you've never said before? Because that means you've reached out of the shell. Did you hear something that you've never heard before? It means you took your ear out of the shell. And when people say yes, then I say to myself, we've had a session. Something's happened. Right. And that something isn't something that can be mapped. And I don't know what it's going to be. They know, and I need to remove the obstacles.
And Buber was alerted to it, where relationships are often one of fear. He has an expression that it's like we all develop some sort of protection. The German word is Panzer, which is the same word for a tank. His friend and colleague, a psychiatrist, Carl Jaspers, said that each developed sort of a shell like a snail. And once you're in that shell, you're safe. But it's not truly who you are. But to be truly yourself, you have to be able to exit the shell and reach out to the hand of someone else.
Sometimes I say to people, you know, there are these things you never say to each other. They're on the tip of your tongue. You know what they are. And you don't, you swallow it. That's the shell. So how about give it a little push, see what happens. Is that going to kill you if you hear it? And those are the tiny little moments, and I don't know what it's going to be.
There's a wonderful word in German which is not translated adequately in English. It's called Geborgenheit, which means security, warmth, certainty. And I vow, certainly in Buber, well, he does uses the term, how do we establish that Geborgenheit in our mutual relationships? That I'll be giving lectures in Denmark on listening as opposed to hearing. What constitutes listening to another human being? It's certainly not just hearing. We convey that we're listening to the other human being, not by simply responding to their words, but it's a felt reality. And Buber insists that it's a felt reality. You can't really fully verbalize what it means to listen, to be attentive to the presence of another human being.
And I'll tell you one other thing that I've realized in therapy, not just family therapy, but therapy in general, that how do I know when something has happened? Only when I know something's happened to me. If something's happened to me, then I know something's happened, even if no one else believes it. And if nothing's happened to me, then even if everybody's sure that this was a great session because we yelled at each other yet, I'm not so sure. The truth is that when you put Buber at the center of a therapeutic world, you have to shuffle the whole deck. You can't use any of the other terms in the usual way. For example, you know, when I think about families, and I think about the level of differentiation of families, which is the leading way that people think now, and it's the way that I think, that a level of differentiation has to do with the ability to have I-thou meetings. That's what preserves, that's what differentiation is about. That's not in the theory. And if you say something strange, like the meetings are the core of it, And this is how to dance with the meetings. This is how to notice the meetings. This is how to enable the meetings. I had the feeling that I may have a reader of one.
All right. You know, Buber had misgivings about the word empathy. Uh, he said because in empathy we often project our own feelings on the other. And he suggested another word, inclusion. How to include the other person's world into your own without judgment, without evaluating, without projecting your own world on theirs. And that's, I think, the secret of what I called, in the Hebrew translation, I called the narratology of understanding. Creating a narrative of mutual understanding, how to include the story of the other without denying your own story.
But it's about the way that people take each other as wholes, come out of the shell for a moment, and do something they haven't done before. Now, I don't know if you remember, I told you once that about 20 years ago, a little bit more, 25, when the laboratory discovered the mirror neurons between people, this came to me as a revelation a few years afterwards in a book by Dan Stern, who was a developmental. He studied the kiss. He was a guy who just loved watching mothers and babies. So he made a profession out of it and became the world's leading professor of infant psychiatry. But it's all about these soft guys who like to see that kiss. So he wrote this book called The Present Moment. And the present moment was about the way that the mirror neurons, people co-create each other. And he used the term co-creation, which I had been calling it mutual creation, but co-creation, that's a great term. So I wrote him a note, and I said, you know, you should read Martin Buber. It's old stuff, but there's something about co-creation right there under your nose. And he wrote back. He said, I have a daughter who's doing a doctorate in theology, and she keeps telling me the same thing. Read Buber. 15 years later, when the discovery of the mirror neurons was ready to write his book about the origins of intersubjectivity, there it is in the beginning. He said, the origins of thinking about intersubjectivity in brain science is found in I and Thou, Martin Buber, in 2016. So we're moving forward and back at the same time into discovering something that there was just an extraordinary intuition there. And it's such a privilege to be part of working on that intuition.
I wrote a biography of Buber. In some sense, writing a biography is autobiography. It's my Buber. And the Buber I thought appropriate to share with others. And I present Buber as a fellow human being who's, as all of us, bears scars along the way. When he was 3 years old, his mother left, eloped with a Russian lieutenant, and just left the house without bidding him goodbye. He rushed to the window, a little boy of 3, waving, and his mother never turned around to say goodbye. And he had difficulty comprehending that as a child would. He was raised by his paternal grandparents, observant traditional Jews. They didn't know how to respond to him. He said, "Where's my mother?" He said, "Don't worry." And he felt that pain. But it's not the only scar Buber had. He mentions in his few biographical comments that he was a very lonely child. And the first experience of otherness, of being accepted, was with a cat and later a horse. If I understand, and it's my understanding, and I believe it somehow could be the understanding of the readers, is that Buber's attention to interpersonal relations and how difficult they are to nurture and sustain emerges from his own experience of being alone. And this certainly is, and you're, better than I, what it means to create trust, not simply as a way of friendship, but existential trust, that you're no longer fearing the other. The other can be, if we want to put it simply, a true companion.
That there's something about trying to talk about what can't be controlled. And, I don't need to tell you, Buber was a firm anarchist in many ways. He didn't like the idea of law in general. He actually hated law. And there's something that when you release people to what they can do together, you're letting them be free. It's not up to the therapist. The therapist is actually a deconstruction of the prison. He takes people out of their shells and helps them to take the risk, to feel that they can create something new. And so I'm looking for sort of a language for how to say that, and co-creation I think is helpful. But frankly, I'm waiting for the next person to find this book and say, that's not how to write it. Here's how to write it. Because I think that's as far as I can take it. You know, it's when Buber went to speak at the Sullivanian Institute in America, and he agreed to come, and he said, because you keep the questions open. I like that. My hope in some ways is there's an underground culture, that there's something that's going on in the people I think of our children's generation that I think is more open to the question.